there, welcome back. I'm going to talk about Body Double today, and it's another one of the series that they needed this failure. Now, this is different from what I did with 1941, which was a film about a failure that Spielberg needed to progress and get rid of some potential bad habits. This one is about a film by Brian DePalma. He needed the failure to move on, but he lost something after he moved on as well. So it's a kind of, he needed the failure, but there is an asterisk to it. He may have lost some of his ambition after this failure. So it becomes a kind of double-edged sword. It's also about the fact that he made this film in one mindset and the industry had changed. He had to switch over to another mindset to survive in an industry. And ultimately, he moved on to going back to his old ways later on. So, Body Double is his last a big, Brian De Palma-esque film, the psychosexual thrillers for the studios with a kind of reasonable budget. Later on he would make Raising Cain for Universal that was low budget, it did well, we made money off it, but it wasn't a big mega production, it was a little production within a bunch of other productions and it did well, but it was not the mega production. Nor was Femme Fatale. That was made in France. That was the start of his new period. We would kind of go back to what he'd been doing up to Body Double, which was these odd thrillers, psychosexual thrillers. Somewhat better than others, but he went on to do. He did Femme Fatale and he did Black Dahlia, which was not as big a success, but there was some nice, interesting elements to it. But it was a very flawed film, but still interesting. Then there was Redacted, which is a really interesting film. And there was Passion, which is another interesting, weird psychodrama with lots of weird nuances. So he went back to what he was doing. Domino is a weird, flawed film like Black Dahlia, made years later. But he did go back to this kind of style of filmmaking later on in Europe. But it's hard to get financing. And it's basically a kind of case of De Palma's kind of retired, more or less, now. He's kind of... I'm sure he wants to do films, but what I've heard from interviews is like, if I don't get to make them, I don't get to make them. I'm not going to kill myself doing this. So it's that kind of thing. As a director who's kind of slowly been retiring for a bit. But it went out with some interesting films too. I mean, I'd much rather it went out with Passion rather than Domino. But Domino still got interesting bits to it. It's just got some flaws. It's one of those films that's been, I've done a video on it. It's also been cut down. From what it should have been. But there's some interesting stuff to it. But Passion's more interesting. But anyway, De Palma from the early 60s was a satirist. He was into satire, pretty big. And then he went into psychodramas. He was interested in the psychodramas and the melodramas, even when he was doing the satires, the comedies like Greetings and Hi Mom. There's still elements of melodramatic stuff of society and the craziness of society and how people create their own little melodramas to stay sane within a society that doesn't care about them. So he was doing that in the 60s. He had his big chance with Getting to Know a Rabbit. It failed. He came back to New York and he made Sisters, which was a full-on psychodrama, but still with a lot of satire and a lot of gullibility. And he used the tropes that Hitchcock had created, what Hitchcock had taken from Fritz Lang, taken from other people, all of the kind of psychodrama. And Hitchcock added this kind of sexual Freudian feeling to it. Then De Palma added a kind of satirical nature to it. It's almost like these techniques that are there to impact you by sticking to the one point of view and watching the drama spread out between this one point of view. And just how you're interpreting things to create suspense. De Palma added satire as like a case of, you could be really wrong. You might not be as smart as you think you are. You might be kind of stupid. And he added this satire, but what you're missing when it comes in could turn the drama around. And so he added this other element which hasn't really been taken up by a lot of critics because it's easy to say, oh, he's just doing Hitchcock. Well, no, Hitchcock was doing Lang. De Palma's doing Hitchcock, doing Lang, doing other people. It's a progression. Body Double was when he did Hitchcock too much. and he stepped back. I mean, when we come back with Raising Cain, Hitchcock stuff was played a lot more light-hearted, and was elements of Peeping Tom and elements of the kind of voyeurism that Michael Pell's interested in as well. Then we went to Femme Fatale. It was very European thriller elements in there and dream logic, and there was far less Hitchcockian. And they kind of moved off Hitchcock after Body Double quite a bit. Even though he took some of the tropes of Hitchcock, it was kind of integrated into other stuff he was interested in at that point. And it was like it would be a throwaway joke rather than an actual obsession with Hitchcock. Like, I think Body Double was his end of obsession with Hitchcock to a degree. After that, it was more playful, and we see that some of the Untouchables, this obsession with doing a gangster film, and then he threw in a Eisenstein sequence, and it was much more playful, which is part of the problem though, because it became much more playful, and it's helped in some films, in our film, but a lot of his careers since then, he kind of moved into Hollywood blockbusters more, and he's more playful with it. But he was also a little less satirical with the intent. And then when he made a genuine melodrama with Casualties of War, people didn't appreciate it, because it was like he wasn't taking that for satire, and he did it for melodrama, he did it for real emotion, and people didn't appreciate it, even though it's a wonderful film. And then he went into things like Carlito's Way and Mission Impossible, which he added a playful sense of humour to these films and did some great suspense sequences. But again, the satire was missing, even though in Mission Impossible he kind of killed off all the cast early on and made the hero of the TV show the villain, and he messed with the fans of Mission Impossible as much as they possibly could. And of course, the funny thing is, as the series went on, everybody just ripped that off for every Mission Impossible film from then on. It became the template. This parody became the template, which is kind of funny, you know. And they're actually good films. It's almost like a certain point in Mission Impossible actually came together with Chris McQuarrie taking over the writing and then directing. He seemed to appreciate that because he'd done Usual Suspects. He appreciated the weird twists and turns of the DePalma stuff and started to do some interesting stuff with it. So he moved on to someone else. But it's not as satirical as DePalma would make it. But leading up to Body Double, he'd done the satire of Phantom of the Paradise, which no one understood at the time. But it was a total parody of what we need from the pop or film industry and what we will actually do to succeed. And this film is very tied to Phantom of the Paradise in lots of ways. Then we made Carrie, which was a look at the trauma of youth and how cruel people can be to each other. It's almost like a snake pit of high school. A bit less satirical than some of his other films. Like DePalma films tend to make more money when the satire was less obvious. You know, somebody had to behave a little bit. But there's still lots of funny stuff in that. He made The Fury, which was a technical exercise. Then he came back with Dress to Kill, which is a wonderful satire about sexual trauma and sexual confusion that takes place out everybody. Everybody gets it in this film. You know, it's a riff in Hitchcock and Psycho, but it's also not, because it's like Psycho's kind of melodrama, and this is much more a parody of how everyone's weird. And this is just the most extreme version of it. It's a reinvention of those kind of ideas into something that's much more about the modern world and how people all have the weird hang-ups, and like the villain in this one is just the most extreme version, but it'd be still kind of not entirely unsympathetic, because it's like a reaction to the craziness of the world. Then you'd Blow Out, which was, he took the kind of melodrama and satire together to create a melodrama that actually had meaning, but it was also a satire on the futility of trying to change the world and how no one wants it changed and how you're probably doing it for your own needs. Then he went all out with Scarface, about how everyone is basically heroes and everybody will do what they need to survive. On Body Double, he kind of brought everything back together in a different way. But the big mistake he made in Body Double was he went for Vertigo, because he'd done a Vertigo and Obsession, which was his weakest film in the 70s. And he went back to Vertigo, and it was too obvious for what he was doing. It kind of made everyone just say, okay, this is a rip up of Vertigo. We don't have to think anymore. We have to look at everything else he's doing. We don't have to think at all. It's just Vertigo. That's it. Let's ignore it now. And if everyone likes it, you like that rip off of Vertigo. It's like, it's that kind of thing. There's a lot more going on, but it was a big mistake because he had a lot of ideas in here that had nothing to do with Vertigo. And that one element just made everything else get completely obscured. Because it was already something he was going to go into more successfully with Femme Fatale. With the idea of doubling up and doubling your life and the subconscious and people with representations of other sides of you. There was lots of things like that in there, but because he'd literally made it too much of Vertigo, everybody ignored that and went straight for the lots of rip-off. And plus he had lots of violence that was viewed as misogynistic, which was, and it did go a bit far. Even he went a bit far this time, but it was actually on a bit of the kind of male anger and the nastiness within males. So it was actually aimed at the kind of violence within the average guy and his frustration with women more than let's be cruel to women. It was just an expression of that, but it was because the Vertigo thing already had obscured what the point of the film was. No one could really see what the point of the film was. So the film is basically about, it's set in LA, and there's this hack actor who's just been fired from a vampire film because he's claustrophobic. And then he goes and finds his girlfriend's cheating on him. And in a wonderful bit, she smells when she's caught. Like she's had enough of him. He's so annoying to her. And his character is bland. I mean, initially when I first saw the film, I didn't like it. The lead character was bland and a bit stupid. And now that's part of the fun of it because it's completely intentional. Like the whole point is this guy is repressed and he doesn't know what he's doing and he's useless. And especially if you see it projected. If you see it in a small screen, it's harder to tell some of the stuff. But the big screen, it's much more obvious that it's a joke. The whole thing's a joke because DePalma's doing a lot of his techniques, the melodramatic techniques. But there's a wink because it's obviously you're seeing the film that's playing in this guy's head. But you're seeing the guy as we see him, which is this bland, stupid guy. But he's seen this big melodramatic thing where he's the hero, where he's been trapped and he's been confused and he's doing all this stuff and he's amazing. But you're stuck with this guy in the centre of it who is just this bland Hollywood actor that just looks like a bland Hollywood actor of the 80s and is self-involved. You can only see things through his prism. So, like Vertigo, he is fooled by a friend to see an image and gets confused by the image and is set up to be the patsy to view a murder and get the guy off who's trying to kill his wife, or his ex-wife. That's all Vertigo stuff. That's what kills the film. But the point of the film actually is about the melodrama of this guy and how he sees things and how nothing's his fault apparently, even though everything's his fault. He falls for everything. And the whole idea is it's all about mirroring, because they're talking about body doubles as being the thing is, the thing that fools them is this woman who turns into a porn star does a dance, sexy dance on the building opposite where he stays. He gets seduced by that. He thinks that woman is the woman he's following. So even though he thinks he's following her because he thinks she's been followed, he's actually been really seedy and he will deny to the end. I always try to help her. And it was like, no, you were being seedy. You're seduced by an image. And it's about that kind of male weirdness. Like, oh no, we're not being seedy, we've been romantic. And that kind of weird urge that men have just generally towards women, like there's a sexual element to it that is ignored in most films. And here's DePalma just rubbing it in your face. It's like, yeah, no. One, you probably look blander than you think you do. You're not as sexy as you think you do. And two, your motivations are completely devious and obvious to everybody else. And it's a lot seedier than you'd like to actually admit to yourself. And the villain just trapped him in this. And then the villain uses this obvious disguise of an Indian to hide himself while he's stalking the wife to make the stalker see him so that he follows the wife and gets trapped in this image and make him think he's the big brave guy, even though it's a satire and the whole thing. And the guy who's doing it to him looks enough like the character, but much more successful than it is. It plays out completely as his dark side is pushing him towards this violence and nastiness that he does not want to think about. And it's also DePalma just saying, look, we've all got this cheesy self-view of ourselves. So the whole film is set in LA and it's full of cheesiness and imagery and these twisted horror movies that are really laughably bad, that people are trying to take seriously, and a whole world that is vain and based on looks, because even the woman who DePalma has been followed is fairly banal as a person. There's nothing to her. She's just the person who's been stalked. There's nothing else to her. She's the image, the kind of image that you see, the sexualized image is someone else, but they end up making up something in his head that's not real. But unlike Vertigo, he's not trying to create it, he's just responding to something and putting a lot in to something that's not there at all. It's just not there. There's nothing there. He's just imagining all of it, and he's just getting frustrated and angry, and the villain is his dark side. The villain's obviously his dark side. It's all the kind of horrible stuff because he's angry with his girlfriend for cheating on him, even though he thought they had a wonderful relationship. He's angry at the world, angry at being fired. There's a lot of nastiness under the surface that he will not admit to that's just coming through. And the funny thing, of course, the villain is much more likeable than the hero because he's much more relaxed in skin. And then the second half, once the murder's taken place, murder's a really good sequence where he sees the murder, he has to run from one building to the next, has to avoid a dog, he fails, she dies. It's really well shot, and it's also disturbing because there's a drill involved and it's horrible and it's meant to make you uncomfortable. It's meant to make you twist and think, okay, what was I really into this for? What's really going on? It's meant to really mess with you. That's the point of it. And in the second half, his reaction to all of this, and then he gets called out by the policeman as being a stalker and a peeper, all of which is true, and he also has a underwear in his pocket, which is also true, he did all that. His reaction to all of this tragedy is to watch porn. Typical male response. I've no idea why no one spotted how much of a parody this film was. How much it was taking the mickey at the lead character. I think because in most films, your lead character is meant to be like upstanding. Here's a film that's absolutely destroying the lead character at every opportunity. And at first I thought it was a bad performance. Now I'm thinking, no, I think this guy was in the joke. I think he knew what he was. He knew that he was meant to look a bit flat. Or if it was another con job like Verhoeven with Starship Troopers. you know. But his idea was to watch porn after all this tragedy. After watching a woman being murdered, he watches porn. And he spots the dance. And then this whole thing now, this point, could just be all in his mind. Because there's some stuff that goes on after this that's intentionally outrageous, and things happen. It's intentionally like poking at you, like you really believe all this. That makes you think this is all in his head. Because you could read the whole film as being he was the villain, he was a peeper, and he did see his woman die, and he doesn't know why, and so he creates this whole fantasy around it. Or you could see, oh, this happened, this ridiculous story happened. And basically he finds this dance that she does on a porno, goes and tracks her down, actually as a legitimate actor, goes into a porno world and actually acts in a porno. And this Frankie Goes to Hollywood extravaganza that no one understood was satire. Because DePalma is pretty much saying that Hollywood actors are kind of stupid. Hollywood is pretty seedy and it's not much more above porno. And it's a lot of pretensions, and this whole melodrama is equated to the porn world, and all this sleazy B-movies that go around it is what's been satired, and it's taken what was a tradition that was taken from pulp but elevated by style, and has now become this cesspool for an industry that doesn't care about people at all, and it's filled by idiots. That's the film's kind of saying. And basically he solves a murder after being in a porno, or being a real actor in a porno, or a real actor in a porno. He's not very good. He's in trash, even before this thing starts. He's in a vampire film that's trashy. And he's viewed as not a good actor. And it's that thing, someone asked him, do you make a living? He goes, yeah. But he's also saying he doesn't make anything good. So it's that thing of, he's in an industry and he's not well respected and he's not very good at his job. And the whole final third is basically him tracking down the villain, who ends up acting like the villain for one sequence to get information, which kind of just shows you how close he is. He's doing an acting job. It shows you how close he is to that person in the first place. It's like, these are just shells of the same person who's insane. Finally, you have the big conclusion. The mask comes off. You see the guy set him up, but it's an obvious mask and it's an obvious joke. And his way out of almost dying in the end is to actually reimagine himself at the beginning of the movie in his vampire role, when he first gets claustrophobic, to pull himself through that fear, as if it's an acting exercise, because that's his only way to do it. Is he can't face reality. He has to actually imagine it as an acting exercise to actually do something in his life. He's that self-absorbed. And then his big thing after succeeding in beating this guy is to get his old job back in a terrible vampire movie. Which again, this could be basically all in his mind, and he's dating a porn star. This could be all in his mind. This could just be the facile fantasy of a useless hack actor in LA. Imagine himself within of this amazing love story that turned tragic and all the rest of it. Because when he first meets her, he stalks her for so long, and he kisses her, and then she runs away, and then she dies, and he imagines that as something important, and it's like, it's so far away from what Vertigo was. Intentionally, it's a parody of the whole thing, but because it's Vertigo, everyone just never took it beyond that. It's like, no, this film understands Vertigo. This film also understands the world it's in, and it's about the world it's in, and how all these melodramatic things have become stained and brutalized by just exploitation of the industry. So it's kind of like Showgirls in a sense of, it's a director so tongue-in-cheek and so intentional in not having good performances by certain people and actually being cheesy that people don't get that it's a satire, it's a indictment on them, but they kind of feel it though. I mean, this film was like Showgirls and it was hated. It was a massive bomb when it first came out, and then it created the film industry to porn, basically. DePalma lost the deal at the studio that made it. Then he came back later on with Untouchables. The reason why they needed this bomb was he had to change to survive in the industry. He couldn't keep on poking at them and a satirist, so he had to become a kind of blander version of himself. And he made very good films after that, but I'm not sure his heart was in it as much as it was before this film. And because he'd been in a really good run before that, and then suddenly he hit this film No one got it. Everyone took it at face value, and then he was in retreat for a long time. And he made some good films, but eventually came back later on in Europe and did some interesting, weird stuff. But it's not as interesting. It's not as satirical as it was before. He wasn't taking those chances he was before. So he needed this failure to keep his career going, to understand he's in a different industry now. Like, he survived a lot more than Paul Schrader did or Scorsese did. Scorsese in the long term got respect, but he did a really bad 80s. And it took him to the 90s to recover. And then, even then, you can't say what Scorsese's doing now is great. But it's like I both think both of these were New York directors who found a way to survive in the industry. They're probably compromised more than they like. But they still made some good stuff, made some bad stuff. But it wasn't quite the same. After 84, it wasn't quite the same. Like, everything had just shut down after that. I mean, DePalma made this as a satire. Scorsese made kind of comedy. They both bombed. A bunch of other directors made films. Probably made a Born from the Heart. It was just like one of those things. Is like everybody just kind of collapsed at the same time. So this was DePalma's one that made him have to refigure what he was doing. And it's not as good as Scarface. It's not as good as Dress to Kill. But it is very worthy. I don't think it's as good as Raising Cain or Femme Fatale either. But it is very interesting. It's just got that one flaw though. What it needs is engine is the vertical things, but it takes it so literally that you can't see what's actually going on in the film. Because you're so tight to the vertical story that it becomes too easy to dismiss all the stuff that they don't want to think about. Like this idea of these hack actors and all they can do is view things in their own lens, their own selfish lens and their own weird fantasies. Which is probably what people in Hollywood do and people in life do is, oh, I saw the world this way, I saw these events this way, and it's like that. I never saw that happening. That's weird interpretation of that. You see that all the time nowadays. And that film's about this weird disconnection that's in a kind of self-involved industry and in self-involved people, and much is what you're seeing, because a lot of it does feel like you're watching how he views it, how he's innocent, and if you took a camera to another direction, you're like, well, that guy's really weird. But De Palma's doing all his techniques to show you how he feels, but also backs away enough so you can see that that's creepy, that's weird, he's not even good at what he's doing. It's just like I look at a weird stock and a weird male perspective that's very self-pitying and self-indulgent and fantastical and fantasizing in a way that's not very useful for anybody, including themselves, and has no depth of view of what they're actually obsessed on. So it's a very interesting film. So De Palma needed this failure, but also was a failure that really crippled him for a while. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it shed some light on this film that's not very well respected. And I'll be back soon for another video. Right, bye for now.